Distinguished participants and speakers, good afternoon, morning, and evening. Welcome to the 4th Greenhouse Gas Inventory System Training Workshop, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Yoo-jung Kim, Senior Development Management Expert from the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, located in Incheon, Korea, and it's my great pleasure to moderate today's workshop. This event is co-organized by United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNESCOP, and Institute for Global Climate and Ecology, IGCE, Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization, TGO, and the UNOSD. The main objective of the Greenhouse Gas Inventory System Training Workshop is to provide capacity building for developing countries with a focus on Asia-Pacific region on utilizing national greenhouse gas inventories for the implementation of SDG 13 and the Paris Agreement. Due to the continuing COVID-19 pandemic, we have organized this workshop through Zoom again this year. We're also providing live streaming service through TGO's Facebook page. So anyone who is interested can join the meeting on Facebook without registration. And please note that the presentation material and the recordings will be available at the UNOSD website and UNOSD YouTube channel. And currently our website is under maintenance, but we expect it'll be open soon. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat box. Now with this, I would like to start the workshop with the opening remarks. The first speaker is Mr. Chun-Gyu Park, head of UNOSD. Please welcome Mr. Park.
Thank you, Ms. Kim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Where are you at? Distinguished participants, speakers, partners, and ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to welcome each and every one of you for joining the 4th Greenhouse Gas Inventory System Training Workshop. Although I would love to welcome you in person, but due to current COVID-19 situation, especially the Omicron variant, I should decide to hold this workshop in an online format for its second time. This complicated situation makes me feel much deeper gratitude for your participation in this event. I would also like to thank our co-organizing partners, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNESCOP, the Institute of Global Climate and Ecology, IGCE, and the Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization, TGO, for their meaningful contribution to this event. My special thanks go to Ms. Katinka Weinberger of UNESCOP and Mr. Kiachai Maitreong of TGO for your continued support to my office. Obviously, my most sincere gratitude goes to all the speakers who have gratefully made their presence today out of their busy schedule. I'm sure your insightful remarks and presentation would make our event very instructive and productive. Distinguished participants, the world, including the Asian and Pacific region, remains far off track in meeting the Paris Agreement target on limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. The pace of climate change is relentless, and countries around the world continue to experience climate-related disasters such as drought, storm, wildfire, and heat wave. Despite all the efforts countries are making today, we cannot be rest assured of the progress being made thus far, as it is not advancing at the speed or scale required to tackle the climate change. We are still on the way to the devastation of our climate system. As the world recovers from the pandemic, this is obviously desirable to all the livelihoods. Greenhouse gas emissions are expected to rise further unless critical steps are taken. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told the General Assembly a month ago, I quote, global emissions must be reduced by 45% by the end of the decade to reach carbon neutrality by mid-century, which requires an avalanche of action in 2022. Designing effective climate mitigation strategies and policies starts from a well-established greenhouse gas inventory system because it allows countries to measure, report, and verify the current state of emissions and make projections and future scenarios. GHG inventory serves a valuable vehicle for the implementation of the SDG 13 and the fulfillment of the Paris Agreement. With the completion of the Paris Agreement rulebook in the COP26 in Glasgow last year, the importance of national greenhouse gas inventories is becoming increasingly essential. While countries need to equip themselves with more accurate greenhouse gas data, the level of capacity to do so varies very deeply from countries to countries. Thus, assisting governments to strengthen the inventory mechanism along with their monitoring and reporting obligations remain a top priority for my organization, the UNOSD, with the mandate to support the member states in developing and implementing the sustainable development strategies and policies. The UNOSD has played an active role in the capacity building of the developing countries in the area of tackling climate change and enriching government's mitigation tools. Specifically, UNOSD has hosted a series of greenhouse gas inventory system training workshops since 2018. As an extension of the annual training workshop, my office organized a side event at the COP26 in Glasgow last year on advancing greenhouse gas inventory systems, where experts from India, Guatemala, the Republic of Korea, and Thailand shared their experience, best practice, and lessons learned on the GHG inventory system. Colleagues and distinguished participants, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development clearly emphasized the interlinkage and interdependence of each of the SDGs. Achieving the SDGs by 2030 heavily relies on addressing climate crisis, highlighted by Goal 13. It is well known that current level of climate action is not enough to achieve the SDGs. We need to accelerate our action to combat climate change and its impacts. And to do so, we need to enhance our understanding of the links between climate change and SDGs. This is a workshop. We'll begin with knowledge sharing on climate science and its interlinkages to sustainable development. Then we'll turn to the status of mitigation efforts in Asia-Pacific region, followed by introduction of the methodologies for GHG emission inventories made by the UNESCOP and IGC. I hope this event will serve as a platform for policy dialogue and capacity building. My office UNOSD will continue to perform and accelerate our roles to support governments and stakeholders in finding and developing their transformative and sustainable pathways in achieving the SDGs. In the area of climate change, we'll continue to provide training and technical policy support on GHG inventory system, both at regional and national level. Lastly, once again, I thank you all participants and co-organizers, and I wish you all 2 days of fruitful and productive research. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Park, for the opening remarks. Now we have Ms. Katinka Weinberger, Chief of Environment and Development Division of UNESCOP, to provide her remarks.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Chun-Kyo Park, Head of Office of the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development. Dear Mr. Kyachai Maitriwong, Executive Director, Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization. Dear participants, colleagues, and speakers, first of all, a very warm welcome from Bangkok to this 4th Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventories Workshop, which is a joint endeavor by the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, the Institute of Global Climate and Ecology, and Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization. As you all know, this training workshop is being organized 3 months after the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, which had recognized the need for an accelerated action for rapid, deep, and sustained reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions to ensure that global temperatures can stay within the 1.5 degrees as recommended by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Expectations from the Asia-Pacific region are high. Asia and the Pacific contributes to over 60% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, with the HG20 members from this region being responsible for over half of these global greenhouse gas emissions. 5 of the 10 top countries with the greatest historic responsibility for emissions since the beginning of the 20th century are from Asia. To be able to adhere to the recommendations from the Glasgow Climate Pact, Asia-Pacific member states really need to do a critical review of their current nationally determined contributions. Why is that? A study conducted by ESCAP with partners confirms that existing commitments fall short to bringing the regional greenhouse gas emissions in conformity with the IPCC recommendations of 45% reductions by 2030 compared to the 2010 emission levels. Rather, regional greenhouse gas emissions are projected to increase by 34% by 2030 compared to the 2010 levels. Hence, the countries in our region need to step up, need to raise their ambition, and focus on the implementation of nationally determined contributions. ESCAP colleagues will present the results of this study in more detail tomorrow, but I would like to highlight here also that the region has a really great potential to increase its ambition in the next updates of the NDCs. We saw a rise of carbon neutrality pledges from our region to already 40 countries. While some countries have advanced and sealed those pledges with legal acts and policy documents, many are still in the process of doing so. So while a lot has been achieved, more still needs to be done, especially in respect to enhancing the national monitoring, reporting, and verification systems, which will also support the transparency reporting as per the Paris Agreement. You may ask, why is it important to have better and more accurate greenhouse gas emissions inventories? Well, in addition to enhanced compliance with the Paris Agreement requirements, a more accurate global greenhouse gas emissions inventories will, amongst others, support the next NDC reviews and more ambitious updates, the development of a solid ground for the design and implementation of various GHG emission reduction policies and long-term low emissions development strategies, the identification of key sectors which contribute most to national GHG emissions, the development of carbon pricing instruments and fossil fuel subsidy reforms, a stronger ability to identify national ecosystem-based carbon sinks and the assessment of their contribution to national GHG emission reductions, the development of financial strategies to support mitigation and adaptation efforts, and also the enhancement of public awareness and engagement in climate action. Let me emphasize, coming to a closing, how important it is in this endeavor to have partnerships between the UN and scientific community, such as the one that has gathered here today to enable this workshop. And very deep thank you to all of you. The years leading up to 2030 are critical for the region, and the ESCAP Secretariat stands firm to support technical experts and policymakers in their endeavors. I wish you a very productive training. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weinberger, for your excellent remarks highlighting the important role of Asia Pacific region in responding the climate emergency, and also the role of the greenhouse gas inventory systems. We now have Mr. Kyachai Maitriwang, who is currently serving as the Executive Director of TGO. Due to the conflict of schedule, Mr. Maitriwang kindly sent us his video message.
Distinguished participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the 4th Greenhouse Gas Inventory Training Workshop. On behalf of Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization, Public Organization, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, the Royal Thai Government, I would like to take opportunities to recognize the role of United Nations Office for Sustainable Development in ensuring the success of this workshop. Also, my sincere thanks to the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific and Institute of Global Climate and Ecology for collaborative efforts. The recent COP26 in Glasgow has been successful in several climate initiatives, and most countries announced climate action goals of striving to achieve whether carbon neutrality or net zero greenhouse gas emission. Meanwhile, the problem of climate crisis and the climate impact, especially to Asia Pacific countries, continue to intensify and clearly affects in all aspects as we can reach out according to the scientific evidence published by IPCC last year. However, our region also anticipated new dimension of developed challenges related to tackling poverties, inequalities, vulnerabilities arise by climate change. On the process of countries' climate action, our dimension should be done in parallel with sustainable development. In addition, the accurate and reliable greenhouse gas inventories at the levels are fundamentally to support the right policy decision. At present, Thailand, by the Office of National Resources and Environmental Policy and Planning, had given importance to the national greenhouse gas inventory, which continuously improve to correspond to requirements of the Paris Agreement. TGO, as the key national promoter, we have focused on 3 main actions to drive greenhouse gas mitigation in Thailand towards sustainable low carbon economy and society. First, support provincial, area-based and divide into 18 regions in Thailand to be able to formulate the regional determined contribution target and climate action plan by using the subnational greenhouse gas inventory at the provincial level and pursue provincial governors to announce their plan and achieve performance in the event called Thailand Climate Action Conference that we plan to hold at first time in this year. Second, enhance carbon removals by using nature-based solution through increasing of reforestation and afforestation projects. The projects will be promoted by collaboration between the public and private sector, which will share the benefit in a term of voluntary carbon credit the private sector can be used for offsetting. Lastly, push forward the carbon credit exchange market, which is concretely and transparency verifiable with reasonable price. This voluntary carbon credit market will be accelerate low carbon economics transition to achieve carbon neutrality and net zero greenhouse gas emission within the time frame. Distinguished participants, I would like to take a moment to thank all of you for participating this online workshop, which is opportunity for Asia Pacific region to advocate on the awareness on climate change, as well as the advancement of greenhouse gas inventory system related to the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals number 13 on climate action and the Paris Agreement from participating in this workshop. I wish this training program all the success and hope that this can be lead the empowerment of experts for exceptional climate action. Wishing you and your families are staying safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maitri Wang. So this ends the opening session. Well, for this year's workshop, we have invited distinguished speakers who will share up-to-date science and information on climate change and SDGs, and also country experiences and inventory methodologies. We have reached full capacity of 300 registration for this Zoom account much earlier than we expected. And we now have more than 120 people in the Zoom meeting room. And I believe it is all thanks to the excellent lineup of speakers who accepted our invitation. Thank you very much. And since we have a very tight schedule today, I would like to request all the speakers to keep their presentations within the allocated time of 20 minutes. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Sergei Semenov, Science Director of IGCE, also serving as Vice Chair of IPCC Working Group 2, to present on IPCC 6th Assessment Report.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kim, for the introduction. And let me demonstrate my screen, please. Do you see the screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay. So, well, how it should be made the entire screen I can manage. So, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the organization of this excellent and very useful workshop. Secondly, thank you very much for the opportunity for me personally to speak here. As it follows from the title of my presentation, it's just an information about the IPCC activities. So it is about IPCC 6th assessment report, about the 6th assessment cycle, the first volume approved in 2021, namely the physical science basis, and about a bit about upcoming reports of Working Group 2 and Working Group 3. So, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was organized as an international, scientific, non-political organization in view of the need of countries to have reliable information on climatic issues for decision-making, in particular in connection with the UNFCCC development and implementation. It was established jointly by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme in 1987-1988. The UN General Assembly and the IPCC to prepare scientific assessments of the magnitude and timing of climate changes, their possible impacts on the environment and socio-economic systems, and realistic response strategies. Target audience, its international climate negotiations, first of all, government climate advisors, academia, and also interested public. The IPCC presents the results of the work in the form of publications, namely scientific reports. Let me underline that IPCC does not conduct scientific research itself, but only generalizes and summarizes in its report the information presented in scientific publications. Periodically, once every 5 to 7 years, the most extensive assessment report are prepared. 5 IPCC assessment reports were issued in 1990, 1995, 2001, 2007, and 2013 to 2014. Other publications are also prepared, in particular upon request of member states or international organizations. So we have special reports, methodological reports, technical reports, etc. Technical papers. The publication can be found at this IPCC site, www.ipcc.ch. The IPCC assessment reports consist of the contribution from its 3 working groups. Working group 1 is physical science basis. It's about just physical mechanism of global warming, anthropogenic global warming. Working group 2, it's about impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And working group 3, it's mitigation of climate change. So it's about possibilities to reduce anthropogenic impact on the world climate system. Working group 1 assesses past, current, and future climate changes. Working group 2 describes associated impacts on various natural and human systems, their vulnerability and adaptation options, as well as climate resilient pathways. Working group 3 characterizes opportunities to mitigate anthropogenic impact on the Earth climate, including reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. That is extremely important in view of UNFCCC activities. The IPCC does not make any recommendations, it should be emphasized, but only describes current situation and futures corresponding to various scenarios of anthropogenic impacts on the Earth climate system. So the choice of future is up to governments, up to political process. It's not the business of the IPCC. We are just science. The 6th assessment cycle is ongoing. It started in 2015 and will end up in 2022. Only contribution of working group 1 has been yet completed. It was approved on August 6, 2021. Contribution of working group 2 is currently under consideration by the 12th session of the working group 2 and 55th session of the IPCC. And approval is expected next week, or now this week. The approval of working group 3 contribution is scheduled for March 2022, so in 1 month. Working group 1 contribution presents an assessment of past and future climate changes under some scenarios of global anthropogenic emissions of climatically active substances. It means greenhouse gases and some aerosols. These topics are traditional for working group 1 reports. However, there are important new elements in the current document this time. First, the authors of the report considered the global temperature goals presented in the Paris Agreement. I mean, not exceeding the average global air temperature in the near surface layer of 2 degrees C or 1.5 degrees C relative to pre-industrial values. Secondly, the possibility of achieving those goals under different scenarios of global anthropogenic emissions of climatically active substances are assessed using climate models, global climate models. In the assessment, the new family of scenarios were employed, so-called shared socioeconomic pathways, SSPs. The new scenarios are structure. The new scenarios set structure met two main requirements. First of all, commonality of socioeconomic assumptions, including in relation to the population size, gross domestic product, poverty level, etc., used in different model implementations of the scenario. And secondly, the possibility of studying many ways of world development within the framework of which the given climate parameters can be achieved over time, usually by the end of the 21st century. 5 SSP scenarios have received the greatest use in the applied research. SSP1, it is so-called green development. SSP2 is intermediate one. SSP3, the main feature is inequality between countries. SSP4 is inequality within countries, and SSP5 is use of fossil fuels. So it is, so to say, business as usual, some kind of business as usual scenario. Under these scenarios, different levels of radiative forcing can be achieved depending on the applied climate policy. So there are two entries. First of all, it's type of scenario, and second one, applied climate policy. This is the outcome. This figure demonstrates global anthropogenic annual emissions of carbon dioxide, net emissions, methane, nitrous oxide, and sulfur dioxide under 5 illustrative scenarios. You see these scenarios, each scenario has 2 indications. First of all, number, it says P1, 2, 3, and so on, and then 1.9, 2.6, and so on. This indicates the radiative forcing at the end of the 21st century. So this is the main outcomes of scenarios considerations. And this is the final outcome of climates projected using these scenarios. This means changes in global mean surface temperature in degrees Celsius relative to 1850 to 100, 900 levels, 1900 levels. So it is pre-industrial, relative to pre-industrial level. Ranges corresponding to the very likely category shown for SSP1 2.6 and SSP3 7.0. It is given by shaded zones, shaded areas. So, as clear from figure 2, under low emission scenarios, SSP1 1.9 and SSP1 2.6, it is possible to keep the temperature within the limits described in the Paris Agreement, even it exceeded for a short time of so-called overshoot, while under other scenarios it is impossible. However, low emission scenarios require a very significant limitation of the global anthropogenic CO2 net emissions, tending them to zero and further to negative levels by the middle of the 21st century, as well as a very significant limitation of global anthropogenic emissions of other major greenhouse gases. In its report, Working Group 1 has pointed out the increase of some climate-related hazards when the temperature threshold, I mean 2 degrees Celsius and 1.5 degrees Celsius relative to pre-industrial values are exceeded. For example, the increase in frequency and magnitude of some extreme weather events, heat waves, droughts, tropical cyclones, etc. However, their danger can be objectively assessed only taking into account the details of the spatial distribution of the hazards and the vulnerable systems and sectors, economic, natural, social, and their ability to adapt. These topics, along with the consideration of climate resilient pathways and possibilities to achieve sustainable development goals, are within the mandate of the IPCC Working Group 2. It has just finalized its contribution to the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report, and the approval process is currently ongoing, exactly this week. The issues of technological and financial feasibility of different scenarios of world economic development and respectively different trajectories of global anthropogenic emissions of climatically active substances, greenhouse gases, and aerosols, will be presented only in the contribution of the IPCC Working Group 3 to the Sixth Assessment Report. The approval is planned for March 2022, so in 1 month, approximately. Since the information about contribution of Working Group 2 to Sixth Assessment Report is still embargoed, the approval session is ongoing. Only a couple of methodological points can be made here. First of all, risk is one of the basic concepts of AR6. It occurs when hazards from climate change, including extremes and trends, interact with the exposure and vulnerability of recipients. Changes in the climate system and socioeconomic processes, including mitigation, adaptation, cause change in hazards, exposure and vulnerability. Such risk assessment have so far been synthesized by the IPCC mainly at the global level and partly at the regional level, since in some cases there are still no enough relevant publications, observational data, or model calculations for regional assessments. However, intensive studies in this direction are being conducted by various research teams. It's a slide describing quantification of risk, what it means risk. Sometimes people forget about it. If we have a set of events, A0, A1, etc., and AN, of various intensity in which climate-related hazard manifests itself, A0 means no impact, zero intensity, and P0, P1, and Pn are probabilities of those events in a certain period of time, say summer season. We will assume that in this period of time, only one of these events can occur, and one of them necessarily occurs. This means that sum of these probabilities is 1. D0, D1, Dn is damage values. D0 equals to 0, the damage is absent. In certain units around due the occurrence of respective events. In these assumptions, the risk value R is calculated as the following sum. It's a sum of products probability to damage. This is very classical concept, comes from firstly from Neumann and Morgenstern works, and then developed by many scientists. And IPCC can apply this concept more or less exactly, but sometimes risk means just probability, sometimes just mean impact, but IPCC authors try to use both dimensions, probability and impact magnitude.
Oh,
This
Dr.
picture is
Semenov,
not from the,
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but can you please put your slides on slideshow mode? I've got a request from the participants.
unfortunately, I cannot find this button.
I
Let's see.
think the button is on the bottom on your right side. Yes.
This one, okay? Now it is full screen, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not in the full size.
For me, it's okay on my screen. What about yours?
We can see the divided slides. Can anyone from UNOSD help how to put this back to the slideshow mode?
This is currently on the presenter mode. This has to be changed into the display mode. I think it's in a different language, so I cannot read it, but it's on option that you can search on the top button. Or I can share the screen from my side for now, if that's okay.
Yes, it's okay, absolutely. Please show.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Rio.
Is everything okay? Is the screen okay?
Yeah.
Yes,
For me,
yes.
it's
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this picture is not from IPCC 6th assessment report. It is from the previous report published in 2019. It's a special report on ocean and cryosphere. But the technique for demonstrating risk will be the same in R6, in contribution of working group 2. This technique called so-called burning embers diagram. They show increasing in risk for some systems and sectors with global mean temperature. So you see colors means white means no risk, and yellow it is moderate risk, and then red is big risk, and then purple is very big risk. So we have a legend here. And these dots, 1, 2, 3, and more, it means level of confidence. And vertical chart means the zone of transition. So from low risk to high risk, from high risk to very high risk, and so on and so forth. So you see that increasing temperature can be associated with increasing risks for many systems. Here it is impacts and risks to ocean ecosystem from climate change. The same pictures will be in the contribution of working group 2 to the 6th assessment report. I cannot say more because it is still under embargo. So please, next slide, if possible. Could you please show next slide, if possible? Okay. So I think that it is time to go to concluding remarks for me because time is running fast. So the contribution of working group 1 in particular considered the temperature goals contained in the Paris Agreement. I mean, not exceeding the average global air temperature in the near surface layer of 2 Celsius degree and 1.5 Celsius degree relative to the pre-industrial values. And using climate models, assess the possibility of achieving these goals under different scenarios of global anthropogenic emissions of climatically active substances. At the same time, it was found that under some scenarios with low global emissions, it is possible to keep the temperature within the limits described in the Paris Agreement, even if exceedance will be for a short time period. While under other scenarios, it is impossible. At the same time, emission scenarios, low emission scenarios, require very radical reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, it is not for free, it is rather costly thing. Please, next slide. Could you please demonstrate next slide? Thank you. We are enthusiastically awaiting the assessment of risk to natural and socio-economic systems associated with climate change, which will soon be presented by Working Group 2. Its mandate also includes assessing the adaptive capacity of systems and sectors to climate change, as well as the global development pathways that are resilient to climate change. Finally, the Working Group 3, in particular, will evaluate the technological aspects and financial implications of measures needed to radically limit the anthropogenic impact on the climate system that are critical to decision-making at both global and country levels. We all are looking forward to upcoming findings and conclusions with great interest. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Semenov, for giving us informative presentation on IPCC report cycle, science basis, and the upcoming reports as well. I think it's very important for all of us to know that it is possible to keep the temperature rise as promised in the Paris Agreement if we choose the right development path. We will have a question and answer session after the next presentation. So participants, please feel free to leave your questions to the panelists in the chat box. And if you are watching this on Facebook, we can see your comments too. So please do not hesitate to leave your comments or questions. Now, moving on to the next presentation, I would like to ask the audience to warmly welcome Ms. Claire Ransom, Assistant Project Officer in the Climate Monitoring and Policy Services Division of World Meteorological Organization, WMO, to present the recently published report on climate indicators and sustainable development. Ms. Ransom, when you're ready.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can you all see that? Get in full screen
Yes.
here. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's my honor and my pleasure to present to you all today. And as you heard in my introduction, I'm coming from the World Meteorological Organization. And I'm going to give a brief presentation today on the indicators of climate change and their interconnections to the Sustainable Development Goals. But before I get started with my presentation, I would like to invite you all to do a brief activity, just a short poll that you can access by scanning this QR code on the right with your phones, or you can open a browser on your computers and just log into menti.com and use this little code at the bottom here. It's just 2 brief questions to sort of get us all thinking. I know that we're spanning across quite a few different time zones, and this is going to be a lot of information today. So just to get us off on the right foot to think about what exactly are climate indicators and how might they be related to the SDGs. So I'll give you all a few minutes to scan that QR code and to get into the survey. And meanwhile, I'll just give you a brief overview of my presentation today. Following the interactive activity, I will give a brief overview of the report itself and the global findings of our research on the climate indicators and their connections to the SDGs, before diving into a few key examples within the Asia-Pacific region, more specifically, and going over some extreme events that occurred in 2021 in order to really demonstrate how climate change is affecting our ability to achieve the SDGs and to really show their interconnections. So now I will hop on over to the Menti. Hopefully you are all able to get logged in. I haven't seen any answers yet, but I know that it can take a little bit of time. So actually we'll just leave this up for just a few more minutes in case people are struggling with logging in and getting those answers. Just a quick activity here. Really, there's no wrong answers for these questions. You can really just that first one, what comes to mind when you think of climate indicators? Really anything. It can be, I have no idea, something that you think is related to climate change. Or if you know, please share your expertise with us, or you can go ahead and jump to the second question. It looks like we're getting a lot more responses there. So maybe I'll just show you all the findings here quickly. So in the second question, we are asking, which of the SDGs do you think is most at risk by climate change? And it looks like we've got quite a variation here. So you can see these moving as you all are answering in real time. And we've of course got climate action as the first one. Life on land is coming in number 2, followed shortly by zero hunger and poverty. So as I said, there are really no wrong answers here. This is of course very subjective, and it really depends on where you are answering from and what we're talking about by risks and climate change. But it's interesting to just get us all thinking about how these SDGs are related to climate change. So this poll will be up for the duration of the workshop, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into my slides now that we've all had a chance to do the poll. So within the WMO, we monitor climate change through various different projects, but one of them is through what we call state of the climate indicators. And you can see these indicators here superimposed onto the globe. There are 7 of them, which include greenhouse gases. And I would like to really draw your attention to the fact that greenhouse gases are very centrally located in this diagram, because they are, of course, as we all know, what are driving all of the other ways in which our climate is changing, including by acidifying our oceans, by rising global mean surface temperature and ocean heat content, which are then in turn melting our glaciers and sea ice, all of which are contributing to sea level rise. So I was tasked with researching how each of these 7 key climate indicators are impacting our ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And hopefully by answering that poll, all of you are at least somewhat familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, but just in case you weren't, a brief overview of the SDGs are that they came into force in 2015 and they were globally voted on, and they represent an agenda for the way that the world would like to be by 2030. And as you can see in the diagram here, or if you're already familiar, the SDGs really represent quite a few different sectors of society, from poverty and hunger to achieving more sustainability and better protecting our infrastructure, reducing inequalities, etc. And it's important to note that here now in 2022, we are about 7 years out from when the goals were originally agreed upon, which means that we're sitting at about the halfway mark, which is a great time to start to think about where we've come and how we are going to work more in the coming 7 to 8 years in order to achieve them. It's also important to note that although the goals are global, they will not be achieved unless they are thought about on a national, regional, and of course a local scale. So we cannot achieve the SDGs unless we think about them in sort of a cross-cultural context in a variety of different settings, and without understanding that they really are very interconnected. We won't be able to achieve one without the other, which is what I'm here to talk about today, specifically through climate action and understanding how the ways in which our climate are impacting our ability to achieve the other goals. So throughout the course of our research, we used largely IPCC findings, but of course other academic sources that mapped how our WMO climate indicators are affecting the SDGs. And the results are seen in this matrix. And I do apologize, I know it's a lot of colors, but there are a lot of SDGs. And so what we see here is on the left, those global climate indicators, as you saw superimposed on the Earth. And then along the top, we have the SDGs. And so within each box, it represents how those indicators, if those indicators pose any sort of risk to achieving that SDG. So for example, we see that as the temperature rises, it's going to impact almost every single SDG. And I would like to just mention here that this is, of course, a very simplified version of a visual representation of our research. And what we're not seeing here is that these risks are going to vary significantly across various timescales and that there are a number of other factors that are not being seen, including we're not looking at all of the SDGs here. But it does just go to show that as the climate is changing across a variety of different different areas, it's going to have a significant impact on our ability to develop sustainably worldwide. So today I'm going to show you just 3 key examples, and I'm going to use a couple examples specifically from the Asia Pacific context and some extreme events that have happened in 2021, looking at ocean acidification, ocean heat content, and glacier mass balance. So starting off with glacier mass balance, as I'm sure you are all aware, the Asia Pacific region is home to some of the most important glaciers in the world. And in fact, high mountain Asia contains over 100,000 square kilometers, of glaciers that are supporting the headwaters of 10 major rivers, which are then responsible for the food and water of over 3 billion people. So it's not hard to understand that these glaciers are hugely important for the development of the region. And as they are diminishing due to global climate change, it's posing several key risks to the region's ability to develop further. So what we can see in this map here are some of the risks that are associated with changing glacial mass balance. You'll see the legend here on the bottom left that explains a little bit of the colors. And I know it's a lot, we won't get into each of the risks specifically, but here we can see there are a number of different timescales being imposed in terms of these risks. So obviously biodiversity changes and the way that glaciers will change global weather patterns will happen over the long term. However, much of these other effects, including big changes such as flooding, landslides, et cetera, and those extreme events' ability to impact the goals can happen in much shorter timescales, and in fact is already happening today. So let's take a look at one of those examples as it happened in 2021 in northern India. Some of you might have heard of this flood that happened in July. That was due to a major rock slide that caused significant flooding. I do apologize for the quality of this photo. It's a bit blurry. But the flood occurred not because of a glacial lake outburst, which as it was originally thought, but because of a rock slide that was due to less stable rock formations at the top of the glacier as the ice melted and caused over 200 people to be thought missing or perished, several of whom were workers in the 2 hydropower stations that were damaged. So here already we can see that these kind of events are impacting the SDGs. For example, SDG 11 that aims to have fewer people perishing in extreme events, as well as infrastructure and India's ability to obtain affordable and clean energy as their infrastructure is being wiped out. It's also important to note that this flood occurred in a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as do many of these other glacial related extreme events. So although this one event might not have impacted significantly the amount of tourists that go to the World Heritage Site, many glaciers are located in areas that are becoming increasingly unstable. And so the income that they receive from tourists visiting those sites is something that will need to be considered in the future. So this is just one example of how we can take the theory of risk and see it occurring in real time. Another one is through ocean acidification. So as the greenhouse gases are being absorbed in our global system, about 30% of carbon dioxide is being absorbed into our oceans. And that's up additionally approximately 30% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And as our oceans are acidifying, they're causing they're posing significant risks to our marine ecosystems, as more acidic oceans can really damage marine life, including corals' ability to form shells and skeletal backbones. And so, of course, as they are unable to form these very important backbones of the marine ecosystem food webs, this can have significant impacts on lots of different systems that depend on them, including fishing yields and the income that comes from that, as well as the food security of those who depend on the health of our marine ecosystems for their daily catch. But in addition, this can also cause quite a few risks to the SDGs, again, through natural heritage and tourism that a lot of nations rely upon their healthy marine ecosystems to draw in tourists who want to see these ecosystems functioning. So a key example of that in the Asia Pacific region is, of course, the Coral Triangle, which is the world's center of marine biodiversity. However, there is a lot of information missing on how the Coral Triangle is being impacted by climate change. As we can see on the top right-hand side of this image, this is the global trends of ocean acidification. And we can see since 1985 that the levels have been decreasing of pH pretty significantly. However, we don't have access to this kind of data on a regional scale. And this is hugely important to point out because the Coral Triangle is home to 76% of the world's coral species, which employ more than 2 million fishers, which provide the sustenance for 120 million people. So understanding how climate change is going to affect this area is of the utmost importance, particularly in measuring and monitoring how greenhouse gases are affecting ocean acidification in the area and as that relates to coral health. But of course, coral health is not only related to ocean acidification, but it's also related to the temperature of the ocean. So our third and final indicator that we'll take a look at today is ocean heat content. And this is a little known fact as we talk about the global temperature rise, but the ocean actually absorbs quite a bit, approximately 90% of the heat that's generated by radiative forcing is actually absorbed in our oceans. And the oceans can experience heat waves just like we experience on land, which have extraordinarily detrimental effects. So again, if we take a look at our map here, these are getting increasingly complex. We can see that as the oceans are getting warmer, this is going to have a very significant impact on the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's important to note this top red bar here that as the oceans are warming, these impacts are being reinforced by these increasingly common marine heat waves. So in addition to impacting corals and marine habitats, which again can impact fishing yields, livelihoods, and food security, as well as natural heritage and tourism, warming oceans can have an extremely detrimental effect through ocean stratification, which can impact marine health pretty significantly by blocking the content, the nutrient content, and not allowing the mixture as should occur normally and naturally. But they can also lead to harmful algae blooms and eutrophication, as well as reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that the ocean can absorb as a natural sink. So again, here across these risks, we can see a pretty significant variation in the timescales that these impacts can occur, but they are in fact already occurring. So if we take a look at an example, again, from the Asia Pacific region, we can see here, this top map is actually from our upcoming global state of the climate in 2021, which shows the marine heat waves that occurred throughout the year. We can see very small here in the legend. So if we take a look at the Asian Pacific region, we can see that a pretty significant amount experienced a strong or severe marine heat wave with significant consequences, as we see in this bottom image here, which actually occurred off of the coast of northern Japan, when an unprecedented algal bloom occurred in an area which it had never occurred previously, which resulted in very significant salmon and sea urchin die-off, as seen in this picture here, which had very significant impacts and financial damages. Approximately $58 million were reported from this one event. And it's important to note here that the algal bloom was not only related to the marine heat wave and warming temperature, but it is a factor. And it's something to consider in that just one marine heat wave can have such a significant impact that as they're getting increasingly common and increasingly intensifying, this is expected to have significant impacts not only on the ability of the region to develop sustainably and grow economically, but also to sustain itself and to achieve food security and good health. So I'd like to leave you with this diagram just one last time to draw your attention to the fact that all of the impacts that we have talked about today, and I encourage you to see the others that are in our recent publication are stemming from the global greenhouse gases. And so if we are not able to really lessen our greenhouse gas emissions, we will not be able to achieve the SDGs or to mitigate any of the risks that they pose. So really developing systems to monitor our greenhouse gas emissions and to limit them as soon as possible is of the utmost importance for us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claire, for your wonderful presentation and also the engaging poll activities using Menti. Now we are going to have our questions answered. And looking at the chat box, I can see two questions from Sophie Charbini. And the question number one is it correct to understand that certain alternatives to ozone depleting substances like HFC 134A is also a greenhouse gas? As far as I know, it is a greenhouse gas, but we may need confirmation from our scientist panel. And her second question was, for ocean acidification, could coral health be an indicator as well, or perhaps a sub-indicator? Well, I think Claire probably has addressed this in her presentation, but would you respond to Sophie's questions?
Yeah, of course, I would be delighted. Regarding the first question on ozone depleting substances, at least for us at the WMO, we consider the greenhouse gases to be the top three. And so we don't typically consider ozone depleting substances when we are monitoring greenhouse gases, but of course they do have an impact, and I think it would depend on who you ask. And regarding your question on ocean acidification, coral health is absolutely an indicator. Or as you would say, maybe perhaps a sub-indicator. When we are creating these maps, we really have to keep them as simple as we possibly can, because as you saw, they get very complex very quickly, and there's a lot of interconnections between them. So we tend to just say marine ecosystems or corals' ability to form, but there's a lot more complexity that lies underneath of them, and their health is of course on a spectrum. So it's not just are they healthy or not, but it should indeed be considered much more significantly. Thanks.
Thank you for your response. And I see no more questions from the audience. And actually, I have a question for you, Claire. In your presentation, we could see a very colorful table that shows the interconnection with climate change and multiple SDGs. And I think there must be some differences in the intensity or strength of the interconnection from one SDG to the other SDGs. So can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, of course. So you're absolutely right. There is quite a variation in the intensity. For example, food security is one that was seen pretty much across the board, and that we are aware there's absolutely no question that food security will be impacted by a lot of these indicators. But some of the other ones are not necessarily as set or as secure in the literature. There's more of a doubt. And so what we tried to do to achieve this was, in a lot of the maps, we changed the variation of the lines and the interconnections depending on the confidence levels. But it's also something that will need to be addressed in future publications that we're working on to discuss sort of the varying levels of confidence and how these connections work. But this publication was really the first of its kind. And so our first priority was just demonstrating that there are connections. And then from here, it's for future researchers and for us to specify a bit more how strong the connections are, or how much confidence there are, and hopefully using the IPCC language consistently.
Thank you very much for your response. And we have another question for Mr. Sergei Semenov. Could you please explain the figures in scenario number, for example, 7.0 from the SSP 3-7.0.
Thank you very much for this question. The first number from 1 to 5 means the number of scenarios itself. From green scenarios, it is 1, to 5th scenarios, it is so-called fossil fuel using scenarios. And the second number is radiative forcing in watts per square meter achieved at the end of the 21st century. Within given scenarios, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Many different climate policy can be applied. And depending on these climate policies, different radiative forcing can be achieved at the end of the century. So 1.9, 2.6, and so on. It's radiative forcing in watts per square meters at the end of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because of the time constraint, I think we need to move on to our next presentation. I would like to invite Ms. Aneta Nikolova, Environmental Affairs Officer of Environment and Development Division at UNESCO. She'll talk about ambition and potential of NDC commitments of the Asia-Pacific countries. Aneta, when you're ready.
Yes, I have. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
And yes, I cannot see myself, but I'm also put my camera on. This presentation will be made by two of us, with Hannah Reiter, who is our regional climate change expert, consultant. And Hannah would, yes, Hannah did upload it. Okay, so I would like to thank very much the previous speakers and Claire and Sergey. They have given us a very good background. So now let's move to our region. And why is our region so critical? Next slide, please. The region is very critical because yes, this is just reminding us that we are facing this complex crisis, which is compounding crisis between our biodiversity collapse, which Claire so well explained, with the interconnectedness in every single thing in the ecosystems, be this oceans or also land-based. And they are also enforcing further the climate change, and that will have terrible impacts on our industries, life on Earth, and food security, etc. And we see the impact of COVID, and I believe there will be other diseases coming as well. So if we go to the next slide. Why is Asia Pacific so important in this climate dialogue? It is important because 2/3 of the world population lives here. It depends on the ecosystems of our region as well global. And it also impacts very much that compounded factor with its industrial, with very fast industrialization, and what also Katinka mentioned, if you remember in her speech, our region contributes to over 60% of the global emissions, and we have 8 G20 countries that are also major contributors. We have a couple of countries that are with historical responsibility. So this is just showing you the level of increase of emissions in 20 years. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, something happened.
Yeah, let me just try. Yes, here we go.
Thank you very much, Hannah. We also see that the latest estimates of the compounded pledges from the INDCs and NDCs, updated indices from our region, are also not very sufficient to tackle the global emissions increase. If we go to the next slide, basically our region is is trying, right? So 49 countries have submitted from our 52 country member states in our region. 49 countries have submitted their INDCs, updated INDCs. 37 of these are advanced updated NDCs, and then 6 of these are second NDC. But when we did the study that Katinka mentioned, we had a joint study with our colleagues from UNEP and from UN Women. That's the next slide. And it was reviewed by other partners in the issue-based coalition of the United Nations in the region. We did the scenario development, and we have found out that the gap between the reductions that are promised with these NDC commitments, current NDC commitments, and this is updated even with everything done by December 2021, is quite big with the required, it's not required. We heard from Sergey, IPCC statements and recommendations are not really obligatory, but they are considerable, needs to be considered seriously. The gap between the 45% reduction from 2010 emissions by 2030 for our regional emissions compounded, and what is promised is over 20 gigaton greenhouse gas emissions, which is quite a lot, right? So if we go to the next slide, yes, so basically this scenario shows you that our region needs to work a bit harder, and the commitments were not up to date. But now I would give the floor to Hannah, who would say, who will explain to you that there are good enabling factors and frameworks that have been developed in our region that could help implementation of these commitments. Hannah.
Yes, thank you, Aneta. Yes, exactly. So as Aneta has explained, there is an opportunity and also in many ways a need for the Asia Pacific region to increase emissions reductions. But the question is how exactly? So we, in this report that Aneta has been talking about, we had, it was a joint report from UNESCAP, UN Women, UNEP, and the Green Work. We analyzed 3 different areas where we could, how we could take action. So raising climate ambition, strengthening enabling factors, and gender mainstreaming. I'm going to review all of them for you just now. First, raising ambition. Here, several steps are relevant. Different countries can make commitments in different kinds of ways that will demonstrate their climate ambition. Of course, countries can make and follow through on carbon neutrality pledges. Aneta already showed you some of those, of what they add up to. Countries can also commit to peaking carbon emissions. Countries can also have very precise national level targets for emissions reductions, which could even be put into national laws. Countries can also commit to decarbonizing key sectors, for example, freezing coal-based capacities or phasing out coal or other types of emissions, or even, for example, forestry, or investing in energy efficiency can commit to. And then countries can also introduce a carbon price, which can be introduced through emissions trading or taxes, or also, and last but not least, remove fossil fuel subsidies. So we look at these 6 different ways of how countries are demonstrating that they are raising climate ambition, and obviously countries can do even more. At the moment, looking at one element of raising ambition, for example, the carbon neutrality commitments and goals, we see that during 2021, many countries in the Asia Pacific region committed to different levels of carbon neutrality pledges, ranging from being proposed legislation to a policy document to adopted by law or achieved even. We have one country which has achieved carbon neutrality already, but there's also those that have not yet considered this. So this move to integrate carbon neutrality into national policy is very important and is clearly moving across the region. So that more could be done across the board, certainly, as you can see from this figure. And so we look at all of these 6 different areas. This is one of them, just to give you an example of what it looks like underneath the data. But overall, what we find is that through a kind of especially devised methodology, scoring methodology, we find that for the 6 different types of ambition in the region, 50% of, almost 50% of Asia-Pacific economies fall into the emerging slowly category for having a climate, for their climate impact. So really at the top level of ambition, there are only a few countries, just 10% of countries are really, really striving for the best. Countries that, for example, Bhutan, as I mentioned, Japan, New Zealand, Republic of Korea, Kazakhstan, they demonstrate, but what this also demonstrates is that ambition in the region is not confined to high income countries. There are countries who are at lower incomes, who are really trying to do as much as they can. And this should mean there's a possibility for even more countries to do more. Let's also go to the enabling factors aspect. So enabling factors, what we mean by here is, for instance, mainstreaming climate change. For example, creating a legal framework for climate change action, whether it's the carbon neutrality targets or other types of greenhouse emissions targets, so that action is mandatory for certain sectors or for the whole economy. Another enabling mechanism is to have coordination, so have channels of consultation with different stakeholders, especially different ministries within the government, but also going to the local government level, the municipal level, and also the private sector. A third one is to actually allocate financial resources to the challenge. So having national level or sectoral level budgets for greenhouse gas reductions, making local climate allocations to support or even leverage the private sector engagement. And then last but not least, being more transparent is another way of enabling high climate action, monitoring what's happening, reporting and evaluating the climate policies better. As the saying goes, you cannot manage what you do not measure. So these are different ways of enabling climate action as well. And of course, women need to be prioritized on all of these factors. The integration of gender equality and human rights-based approaches in climate action can enhance capacity and also safeguard the most vulnerable when climate action is being taken. So, and similarly, when we assess how countries are doing in terms of the enabling factors, we find that making progress on enabling factors is also not determined by income. We have countries such as Vietnam, Papua New Guinea, Thailand, who are really at the top parts of the graph, and there are higher income countries, Armenia and Georgia, who are proceeding more slowly. So, but we also have some case studies in the report which also show that many countries have lessons to share with each other, high income or low income. And even if they're progressing less slowly, one can still find some good examples of where they have been progressing progressing well, and that can be relevant to other countries in the region. So I think one of the key messages that we really want to get across is and the last point around gender mainstreaming is a very special aspect of our report. As I mentioned, it can really enhance the adaptive capacity. It can also enhance, safeguard the most vulnerable. And as I meant, and again, we have many developing countries in the region who are actually leading in this area. So Philippines, Cambodia, Fiji really stand out for their progress, while there are other countries even at higher incomes, such as Korea and Republic of Korea and China, who could improve significantly, and especially given their leadership positions globally on climate change. So finally, I will just mention a few just quick key implications before I pass back to Annette to conclude about what next. It's clear that the most ambitious and enabled countries in our region who are taking the strongest action are not just the high income countries. At the same time, most Asia Pacific countries really have the capacity to be more ambitious. And there is a need to really develop even better systems for measuring and reporting, in particular, as one area which is lagging significantly behind. But learning from each other is going to be crucial over the next few years. And of course, workshops like this are very crucial for doing exactly that. Let me pass over to Annette in terms of further next steps.
Thank you, Hannah. I just need to make two key points. So what needs to be done now? Definitely countries need to firmly commit to whatever they pledged so far. Sufficient, insufficient, it doesn't matter. Let's pledge and do it. Also, let's follow the Glasgow Climate Pact. And that is basically freeze any investments in enlarging coal-based energy production, gradual phase down of unproductive current coal-based energy production facilities, and considering at the same time in reinvesting into renewable energy. Using various instruments can help, and one of them is furthering the pledges to carbon neutrality, as well as investing in, as I said, using carbon pricing instruments, fossil fuel subsidy reform for investing in renewable energy. And here we come, definitely, I would highlight as well, measurement is very important. Transparency and measuring, this is the weakest point in our region. And this is just the fourth of these trainings, and we need more of them, on enhancing the GHG emissions inventories capacities of our technical experts in the countries. It is also important to develop long-term low emission development strategies, which would be aligned with SDG targets, with green growth strategies, and would be a fantastic opportunity to deal with the post-COVID recovery. And definitely we have to invest in ecosystems-based, nature-based solutions, which have the most capacity to enhance our mitigation and adaptation efforts, but also will bring livelihoods and would support SDG implementation and development strategies. And finally, we need to coordinate and share between ourselves. With the last slide, I would like to give you an idea that what can the countries do now between 2022 and 2024-5, when you will be updating your NDCs. So what you could do is, while you're developing your long-term low emission strategies, development strategies, you could actually take this recommendation for 45% reduction of 2010 emissions and set up benchmarks for your country on a voluntary basis. So basically looking what is the gap between what is the trajectory now of the current NDCs versus the at the national level versus this 45% reduction target. So then maybe decide of which sectors, also transcribe it per sector and decide how you could actually commit for certain critical sectors like the energy sector, like the agricultural sector, to consider as much as possible reaching that target for the next nationally determined contribution. They have to be more ambitious. We have to know that we cannot go back on that. The next reiteration of the NDCs need to show much higher ambition. So using this as a benchmark would help to develop something tangible. and also transcribe it per sector and develop milestones. And then this would help also to attract financial support from multilateral banks and other sectors, engage the private sector, and would also help to implement the more to change the behavior of the consumer, look into consumer-friendly, climate-friendly consumption and production choices. And this is all aligned with the both key documents, the Glasgow Climate Pact, which was signed by everybody, and as well the work program on action on enhancing climate action in the countries. So engaging everybody, all the stakeholders. So thank you very much. I hope we managed to squeeze ourselves in the allocated 20 minutes. I look forward to your questions. Yes.
Thank you very much, Aneta and Hannah, for this excellent analysis of the level of climate ambitions in the Asia Pacific countries, and for also suggesting useful approaches that the governments can take. We have received some questions on your presentation, but we'll address them later after the next presentation. And if you can provide the link to the report website in the chat box, that'll be much appreciated.
Yes, no problem.
Thank you very much. Now we will move on to Republic of Korea's experience. I would like to invite Ms. Haewon Choi, Deputy Director of Climate Change International Cooperation Team at Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Korea. She will talk about Korea's journey towards carbon neutrality. Ms. Choi, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. When you're ready, please start the presentation.
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but I think if you can speak up a little bit, that'll be very, very helpful.
Okay. So good afternoon. I'd like to thank the officers who prepare for greenhouse gas inventories training workshop despite the difficult conditions caused by COVID-19. So today I will present the enhanced 2030 NDC of the Republic of Korea. Next slide, please. So I will start with the background and progress and then continue with the enhanced NDC and future plans. So next please. So first, the background of the new NDC and the progress that has been made so far. The global climate crisis has become serious with frequent extreme weather events in recent years. Major countries are making efforts to achieve carbon neutrality. So should I have a presentation louder? Can you hear me now? I see the chat and the microphone is not close enough. Is it okay?
Well, I can hear you well.
Okay.
But if you can put your microphone more closer to
Okay.
you, that'll be helpful.
Okay. So the major countries are making effort to achieve carbon neutrality. With the declaration of carbon neutrality, they have enthusiastically raised the intermediate goal of 2030 NDC. Next, please. In July 2020, Korea announced the Green New Deal to proactively respond to the climate crisis. And the president declared carbon neutrality by 2050 through his address at the National Assembly, October 2020. And in April 2021, he announced a plan to raise the 2030 NDC at the 2021 Leaders Climate Summit. Next, please. The Carbon Neutrality Framework Act was enacted on September last year and stated that the 2030 NDC greenhouse gas reduction level should be 35% or more compared to 2018. In addition, the Environment and Labor Committee urged a 40% or more reduction in the bill's deliberation process. The government prepared a 40% reduction plan by 2030 and proposed it to the Presidential Committee on Carbon Neutrality through consultation with related ministries. The committee reviewed it and collected opinions from various fields based on this. Next, please. The following is enhanced NDC proposal derived through the process mentioned above. Next, please. Korea's greenhouse gas reduction goal for 2030 is to reduce 40% compared to 2018, the peak year of Korea's emissions. Korean government set this goal in consideration of the legislative purpose of the act, international trends, and domestic conditions. We discover as domestic reduction measures as possible and used overseas reduction for the remaining parts. Considering the late peak year and the high proportion of manufacturing compared to major countries, it is a very ambitious goal. Next, please. This table shows general information about our 2030 NDC. So we have increased our goal by more than 50% from 26.3% to 40%, and the reduction rate has been evenly increased in all sectors. Next, please. So let's look into each sector. In the energy transformation, we plan to decrease the proportion of coal power generation by nearly half from 42% as of 2018 and greatly expand renewable energy to 30%. In this sector, we aim to reduce 44.4% of emissions. Next, please. In the industrial sector, we will reduce 14.5% of emissions compared to 2018 by improving energy efficiency, switching fuel, and utilizing waste as a fuel source, especially in large emitting industries. Our current goal is more than doubled from the figure in the previous NDC, 6.4%. Next, please. We will reduce 32.8% in the building sector by improving energy efficiency, supplying high efficiency equipment, and expanding clean energy such as solar power. Next, please. And through traffic demand management, we plan to reduce driving distances in the transportation sector while expanding the supply of electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles from 3.85 million to 4.5 million units. In addition, we will reduce 37.8% by improving the biodiesel mixing rate, supplying eco-friendly visual, and upgrading aircraft fuel efficiency. Next slide, please. And in the farming, livestock, and fishing sector, we plan to reduce 27.1% of emissions. We will actively reduce methane, one of the greenhouse gases, by spreading low-carbon agriculture and strengthening livestock management. Next, please. And through the waste treatment sector has a small share of emissions. Its reduction goal is the highest at 46.8%. We will achieve the goal by expanding waste reduction and recycling in all sectors, collecting methane gas generated from organic waste resources such as food waste and using it as fuel. Next, please. And using hydrogen electrolysis and byproduct hydrogen, we will limit the greenhouse gases generated to 7.6 million tons during hydrogen production. We also plan to reduce 26.3 million tons of emissions through natural carbon sink by restoring forest and creating wetland and ocean forest. In addition, through R&D and systemical support, we will reduce 10 million tons of emission by CCUS technology. Next, please. So I think I have a presentation very fast. So lastly, I'd like to explain our future plan. So next, please. For the implementation of the NDC, we will prepare a sectoral implementation plan and reflect them in statutory plans. And in addition, we will support the reduction effort in each sector through technological innovation and strengthening green finance. We will do our best to minimize damage and vulnerable area of classes in the process of carbon neutrality. To that end, related ministry will jointly implement protection system stipulated in the Carbon Neutrality Framework Act, such as the designation of special zones and support for business conversion. So the enhanced NDC that I introduced today was announced to the international community at the COP26 in Glasgow, and we also submitted the official document to the UN by the end of last year. It has been about more a year since the declaration of carbon neutrality, and there have been many changes. As carbon neutrality has become a key value of Korean society, fiscal measures such as the Green New Deal and Climate Response Fund have also been expanded along with the reorganization of law and systems. So based on this effort and achievement, Korea will move forward to carbon neutrality. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chair, for sharing Korea's NDC. As Aneta mentioned, I think it's a very promising commitment. Well, now we'll have the Q&A session, and we have received a couple of questions for Aneta. The first question is from Lindsay Ines. She asked, can you tell us which country has achieved carbon neutrality and how they have done this? Is this through renewables or offsets or carbon capture storage? Can Aneta or Hannah respond to this question?
Yeah, well, as Hannah has shown in the table, we have only Bhutan. Bhutan has been they're endowed with hydropower, so this is maybe the reason, but they are also very careful on not investing in any GHG emission causing energy sources as well. So that is the situation. We're here. We see examples as Republic of Korea. We very much congratulate them for their very decisive steps for decoupling the economic growth which they would like to have from GHG emissions. Hannah, if you would like to also, I just wanted to mention, since the question included CDR, I do believe that even by the end of the century, even earlier, I think some of the countries have started already to develop CDR projects, and that is a necessity because it's not possible to think that global emissions, even if we stop emitting today, that the impact of what we've done so far would stop. It's nothing like that. It's long-term impact, and we need to consider investing in CDR as well. But I know that Australia has done something very remarkable. They've developed a film which they put over the Great Coral Reef barrier, and that has shown promising solar radiation removal from the coral and restoration of the corals. So maybe Claire can mention something about this, and if this there's an opportunity to do some technology transfer there. Of course, ESCAP will be working on this as well. Hannah, if you want to mention anything.
Nothing to add on the carbon neutrality point. I think it's definitely, it's a new, for most countries apart from Bhutan, it is a new commitment. But countries like Maldives and so on are really trying to do this as quickly as possible. So they'll be very important to watch.
Thanks. Claire, did you want to add something to this?
Yeah, just on the comment on Australia's measures, it certainly would make for an interesting report and potentially future research to look at, instead of the risks that are posed by climate change to the SDGs, to look at solutions and how those are being addressed by various countries, because there is definitely work being done across the board. And I would also like to applaud Korea for their improved NDCs, and for Australia for doing similar work. It's definitely remarkable and inspiring.
Thank you very much. The next question we have is from Sophie Charbini. Thank you very much, Sophie, for your active participation today. Her question is, on the point of committing to freezing coal-based growth and phasing out existing capacity, are there any strategies that have been perhaps implemented by countries to possibly phase out coal-based technology?
Yeah, we heard from Republic of Korea. That is a great example, and I'm sure you're going to share the presentation, right? And we could actually jointly facilitate further regional dialogue and exchange of these experiences. But we know that China is also taking decisive steps. I do believe Thailand as well. I hope TGO is represented here physically, because Thailand has been doing a lot of good things lately, especially, and I think we're gonna hear, I don't know if we're gonna hear, but they're promoting electric vehicles as well and alternative energy sources. So definitely, even phase down, stopping investments in new coal-fired power plants would really make a big difference.
Yes, maybe I could add just 2 points. I will add some links to some recent reports, including a policy brief on countries that really have to take the biggest steps to freeze and phase out coal capacity, but also some of the measures that they've taken to do that already, and what they've been saying that they're going to be doing further. So there's some very practical examples from 6 countries in that policy brief. So I will share that that in the group as well, the link to that.
Thank you. And I think this is the last question for Aneta and Hannah. Fatomata Sangare asked, based on your second or third slide, what is your views about China and 1.5 degrees? I think for this she refers to China being the biggest emitter, I guess. Would you like to respond to this question?
Well, China has made a firm commitment to carbon neutrality by 2060. So, and the latest presentations, we had a couple of events in the Asia Pacific region have shown that they are really sticking for this commitment, and they're making very big efforts on that. I do believe that they are considering massive phase down of coal-fired power plants. And they are also investing in renewable energy. I mean, this is the country with the biggest investments in the world in renewable energy anyway, and R&D and investment in human resources that can develop further new technologies. I do believe that they will soon become a front runner in CDR as well in the region. Hannah, do you like to mention in addition?
Yeah, I think, and looking at the assessment report, you'll see that China's kind of bang in the middle in terms of when you compare ambition and the enabling factors that it has. So what we're really saying is that one, what Annette was saying is absolutely right. When China commits to do a particular target, it will deliver that particular target. There's no doubt. But nevertheless, and effectively, China is determining its ambition level by its enabling factors, and those are completely married together. So China's kind of progressing it's not behind in terms of enabling factors, it's not behind in terms of ambition, but it's also not the most ambitious. So it's not really necessarily pushing the boat out as some other countries, including lower income countries, are necessarily doing. But it does mean that because it is kind of bang in the middle, it is really going to have a significant impact on the region, and being able to deliver on what it says it will deliver is going to have a very significant impact, if you understand what I mean. So it's a bit of a difficult one. It's so huge. China's so huge, so transformational, but at the same time, perhaps there's even more that China can do. And I think that's really our general message, that there's so much that every single country can do even more. Even Korea, we've seen Korea definitely as a very strong leader, but even on gender mainstreaming, for instance, that could be done even better. So everybody has work to do. But the more that countries get together, the more that countries work together to deliver, the better.
Thank you so much. Well, the last question from Sophie is, I think, for Ms. Haewon Che from Korea. One of the slides mentions for petroleum chemistry, switching fuel from naphtha to biofuel. What type of biofuel are you referring to? I think this is in the slide number 10. It does say switching a fuel from naphtha to biofuel and hydrogen. Ms. Che, if you are there, can you please respond to this question?
Yes, first of all, thank you for your question. And in Korea, we are in petrochemistry sector. Korea trying to use biofuel, and I think it's kind of microorganism thing, but actually I'm not sure the exact the type of biofuel, so I need to check this one, and maybe I can answer you through your email if you leave your email address on the chat.
Yeah, that's perfect. I can put Sophie and Ms. Che in connection. If there's no question for Ms. Che anymore, I think I may have a question for you. One of our major audience group is the government officials from the developing countries. And from my experience, there is a great deal of interest among these officials in the developing countries to learn from Korea's experience. So my question is, does Korean government provide any capacity development opportunities to the policymakers in developing countries in terms of response to climate change or greenhouse gas inventories?
Yes, Korea operates educational program, and there is a greenhouse gas inventory and research center in Korea. So which is called GIR, and GIR and the Secretariat of the UNFCCC, they are jointly operate the education program, and the program's name is Climate Action and Support Transparency Training. So each year, what I know is that each year, they have about 30 students from the developing country. So they provide the program about greenhouse gas inventory, and the main purpose of this this program is to strengthening their capacity of greenhouse gas metrics. And I asked the detailed schedule of that program to GIR, and they said it is not confirmed yet, but they will post the detailed information on April in the website of UNFCCC. So if you have interest of this program, you can check the UNFCCC website.
Thank you very much for the useful information. I think we have one more question for you, Ms. Che, in the chat box. It's from Kiki Kartikasari. Could you please share lessons, key factors resulting significant improvement of commitments in your former versus updated NDC? So as we were able to see, Korea elevated the level of ambition in their updated NDC. And what do you think what made this significant improvement?
Well, the lesson from the improvement of commitment is that we can show the Korean government's vision to the private sector, because before declaration of carbon neutrality, actually the industrial sector doesn't have interest of the reducing greenhouse gas before, but after the declaration of 2050 carbon neutrality and after providing a 2030 NDC target, and the industrial sector have their interest, and they trying to reduce the emission of greenhouse gas with various methods. So that is the key factor of the enhanced 2030 NDC, I think.
Thank you very much for your response. I think that's all for the questions. And as we are reaching the planned time, let me wrap up today's session. So thank you all, the participants and the speakers, for your excellent presentations, interventions, and your questions, and for staying with us almost 2 hours of time. And also, I would like to convey a big thank you to our dear colleagues in TGO for your support with the Zoom and Facebook. Well, you can find us, UNOSD, on various platforms, including LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The link tree is available in the chat box, so you can easily connect with us. I think we had a very fruitful discussion today, and we will resume tomorrow at the same time. So I kindly ask you to participate tomorrow's session as well. Tomorrow we will hear about the outcomes of the COP26 held last year in Glasgow, and then about the methodologies for greenhouse gas emissions inventories and Paris Agreement reporting. So I look forward to meeting all of you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you all, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.